August 15, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel James Ace Morrison poses confidently beside his P-51 Mustang fighter plane somewhere over the English countryside. Just another heroic American pilot during World War II, or so it seemed. The photograph was donated to the National Air and Space Museum in 2022 as part of Morrison's war memorabilia collection. But when digital restoration experts enhanced this seemingly ordinary pilot's photo, they discovered something in the cockpit behind him that made their hearts stop. A detail so disturbing that it revealed one of the most shocking betrayals in aviation history. What they found would expose how America's most decorated fighter ace had been living a lie that cost hundreds of Allied lives. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what we are about to reveal will shatter everything you thought you knew about World War II heroes. The phone call came to Dr. Sisser Catherine Reynolds at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in September 2022. As the chief aviation historian at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, she was used to late-night calls about historical discoveries. But something in the voice of her colleague, Dr. Different, Michael Chang, made her instantly alert. "Catherine, you need to get down here immediately," Chang said, his voice tight with stress. "I have been working on the Morrison collection, and I have found something that, well, you need to see this for yourself. Doctor, well, you need to see this for yourself." Dr. Reynolds had been expecting this call for weeks. The James Morrison collection had arrived at the museum with great fanfare. The personal effects of one of World War II's most celebrated fighter pilots, donated by his grandson after the family estate was finally settled. Morrison had been credited with 23 aerial victories over Europe, making him one of the top American aces of the war. 20 minutes later, Reynolds stood in the museum's digital restoration laboratory, staring at a photograph that would change everything she thought she knew about wartime heroism. The photograph showed Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison in his flight suit, standing beside his distinctive P-51 Mustang fighter, nicknamed Liberty's Sword. It was dated August 15th, 1944, and appeared to have been taken at a British airfield during the height of the Allied air campaign over Nazi-occupied Europe. At first glance, it was exactly what you would expect from a wartime aviation photograph. A confident American pilot, posing with his aircraft, the kind of image that had inspired a generation of young men to volunteer for the Army Air Forces. Morrison's smile was easy and natural, his posture relaxed, but alert, showing the bold confidence that had made American fighter pilots legendary. But Dr. Targa, Chang had spent the past 3 days subjecting the photograph to the most advanced digital enhancement techniques available, the same technology used by the FBI for forensic analysis. As the image was processed at ultra-high resolution, details invisible to the naked eye for nearly 80 years had begun to emerge. "Look at the cockpit," Chang said, pointing to Morrison's aircraft in the background. "Look at what is mounted on his instrument panel." Reynolds leaned closer to the computer screen, studying the enhanced image with growing confusion. There, clearly visible in the cockpit of Morrison's P-51, was what appeared to be a small camera mounted directly behind the gun sight. The camera was pointing forward, positioned to record everything the pilot could see during combat. "That is unusual," Reynolds said slowly. Gun cameras were not standard equipment on P-51s until late 1944. And this photo is from August. But more importantly, look at the angle. This is not a standard gun camera. It is positioned to record the pilot's actions, not his targets. Chang nodded grimly. "That is what I thought too, but keep looking." Enhance Section 7 Alpha. As the computer processed the specified section of the photograph, Reynolds felt her breath catch in her throat. Mounted beneath the camera, almost hidden by the cockpit's shadows, was a small radio transmitter with an antenna setup she recognized from her years studying wartime communication equipment. It was a German radio transmitter. "Michael," she whispered, "are you absolutely certain about this enhancement? The implications of what we are looking at?" "I have run it through 3 different systems," Chang replied. "The equipment is definitely there, and the serial numbers visible on the radio match German Luftwaffe communication devices from 1943 and 1944. But there is more." He pulled up another section of the enhanced photograph, this one showing the interior of Morrison's flight jacket. Barely visible, but clear enough to read under digital magnification, was a small piece of paper tucked into his jacket pocket. The paper contained what appeared to be a list of numbers and coordinates written in German. Reynolds sank into a chair, her mind racing through the implications. If this evidence was accurate, then James Morrison, America's celebrated fighter ace, winner of the Distinguished Flying Cross and Silver Star, had been equipped with German communication equipment and carrying German documents while flying combat missions over occupied Europe. "Catherine," Chang said quietly, "I do not think Morrison was fighting the Germans. I think he was working for them. But the truth about Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison would prove even more disturbing than either historian could have imagined. James Morrison was born in 1918 in Detroit, Michigan, the son of a wealthy automotive engineer who had made his fortune designing engines for Henry Ford. Growing up in the shadow of America's industrial power, young James had been fascinated by aviation from an early age, spending his weekends at local airfields and dreaming of becoming a pilot. What made Morrison different from other aviation enthusiasts was his exceptional natural ability. He had learned to fly at 16, flying solo after just 4 hours of instruction, a feat that impressed even veteran pilots. By the time he graduated from the University of Michigan in 1940 with a degree in mechanical engineering, he was already recognized as one of the most gifted pilots in the Midwest. But Morrison's path to becoming a fighter pilot had not followed the typical route of American war heroes. Dr. Reynolds' investigation into Morrison's activities before the war revealed a troubling pattern of connections that had somehow escaped the attention of military intelligence. In 1939, Morrison had traveled to Germany as part of a student exchange program studying advanced aviation technology. He had spent 6 months at the University of Berlin, officially researching aircraft engine design. What Morrison had actually been doing in Berlin was quite different. Declassified State Department files recently released under a Freedom of Information Act request showed that Morrison had made contact with high-ranking officials in the German Air Ministry during his stay. He had toured Luftwaffe facilities, met with German aircraft designers, and according to one diplomatic cable, had expressed considerable admiration for German aviation achievements and organizational efficiency. More disturbing still were the financial records Dr. Reynolds discovered in Morrison's personal papers. Beginning in January 1940, just weeks after his return from Germany, Morrison had been receiving regular payments from something called the International Aviation Reserve (WWII) Foundation, payments that continued right up until his enlistment in the Army Air Forces in December 1941. The International Aviation Research Foundation, according to FBI files from the 1950s, had been a front organization operated by German intelligence to recruit assets within the American aviation industry. When Morrison enlisted in the Army Air Forces after Pearl Harbor, his exceptional flying skills and apparent patriotic enthusiasm made him an ideal candidate for fighter pilot training. He excelled in every phase of instruction, showing an almost supernatural ability to anticipate enemy tactics and movements. His commanding officers attributed this to natural talent and intensive study of German fighter tactics. They had no idea that Morrison's knowledge came from direct briefings he had received in Berlin. Morrison's combat record began in earnest in early 1943, when he was assigned to the 357th Fighter Group, based in England. His first aerial victory came on March 15, 1943, when he shot down a German Messerschmitt Bf 109 over the English Channel. Within 6 months, he had been credited with 12 victories, making him one of the most successful American pilots in Europe. But a careful analysis of Morrison's combat reports conducted by Dr. Reynolds and a team of military historians revealed suspicious patterns that had gone unnoticed for nearly 80 years. Morrison's victories consistently occurred during specific types of missions, bomber escort flights where his actions could be observed and confirmed by multiple witnesses. However, during fighter sweeps and reconnaissance missions, where he operated with less oversight, Morrison frequently reported mechanical problems that forced him to cut his missions short or separate from his formation. More significantly, statistical analysis showed that Morrison's presence on bomber escort missions was linked to higher TEN, and average losses among the bombers he was supposed to be protecting. Missions where Morrison served as escort leader resulted in bomber losses that were 40% higher than the squadron average. At the time, these losses were attributed to increased German fighter resistance and improving enemy tactics. No one suspected that the losses might be the result of intelligence being passed to the Germans about American flight routes, timing, and defensive capabilities. But Morrison's real mission in the skies over Europe was about to become clear through evidence hidden in the very photographs meant to celebrate his heroism. The enhanced photograph from August 15, 1944, had captured more than just Morrison's image. It had documented the detailed intelligence operation he had been conducting from the cockpit of his P-51 Mustang. But to understand the full scope of his betrayal, Dr. Reynolds needed to examine the other photographs in the Morrison collection. Working with Dr. Chang and a team of digital forensics experts, she began a careful enhancement of every photograph in Morrison's wartime collection. What they discovered was a collection of evidence that had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 8 decades. The photographs showed Morrison's aircraft at various air bases throughout England, and digital enhancement revealed that the German radio equipment visible in the August photograph had been present in his cockpit for months, possibly years. But more disturbing were the details that emerged when they enhanced images of Morrison himself. In a photograph dated June 3, 1944, just 3 days before D-Day, enhancement revealed that Morrison was wearing what appeared to be a German military watch beneath his flight suit sleeve. The watch was a Laco Aviator's timepiece, standard issue for Luftwaffe pilots, but unavailable to Allied personnel through any legitimate means. But it was a photograph taken on July 20, 1944, that provided the most damning evidence of Morrison's treachery. The image showed Morrison returning from what his mission report described as a successful fighter sweep over northern France. He was climbing out of his cockpit, his face flushed with apparent exhaustion and adrenaline. To anyone viewing the photograph in 1944, it would have looked like the image of a hero returning from combat. But digital enhancement revealed details that told a very different story. Morrison's aircraft showed no signs of having engaged in aerial combat. There were no empty shell casings around his aircraft, no carbon scoring on his gun ports, and most significantly, his ammunition counters visible through the cockpit canopy showed that he had returned with a full load of ammunition. More disturbing still was what the enhancement revealed about Morrison's physical condition. Rather than showing the stress and fatigue typical of pilots returning from combat, Morrison appeared relaxed and well-rested. His flight suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly groomed, and his expression was one of satisfaction rather than the thousand-yard stare common among combat veterans. But the most shocking discovery came when Dr. Reynolds enhanced the background of the July 20th photograph. Behind Morrison's aircraft, barely visible in the original image, was another P-51 Mustang bearing different markings than standard U.S. Army Air Force's identification. The aircraft in the background carried the distinctive yellow nose markings and black crosses of the German Luftwaffe, but it was painted to look like an American fighter at first glance. Only under digital enhancement were the subtle differences visible. The slightly different shade of olive drab paint, the positioning of the national insignia, and most tellingly, the small German identification numbers, P, painted in a location where they would normally be invisible to casual observation. Dr. Reynolds realized she was looking at evidence of one of the most bold deception operations of World War II. Morrison had not been flying combat missions against the Germans. He had been flying with them, using a captured or specially modified P-51 to operate behind Allied lines while maintaining his cover as an American fighter ace. The implications were staggering. If Morrison had been operating a German-controlled aircraft while maintaining his position as a respected American pilot, he would have had access to the most sensitive Allied intelligence, flight routes, bombing targets, defensive capabilities, and operational timing. But Morrison's betrayal went beyond simple intelligence gathering. Analysis of his flight logs revealed that he had been present during some of the most devastating Allied losses of the war, including the disastrous bomber raid on Schweinfurt in October 1943 and the massive Allied casualties during the bombing of Berlin in March 1944. The evidence suggested that Morrison had not just been reporting Allied plans to the Germans. He had been actively taking part in operations designed to maximize Allied casualties while maintaining his cover as a war hero. Dr. Reynolds knew that accusations of treason against a decorated war hero required more than enhanced photographs and suspicious timing. She needed to understand the human cost of Morrison's betrayal, and that meant examining the missions where his presence had coincided with unusually high Allied casualties. Working with military historians at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, she began a detailed analysis of bomber missions, where Morrison had served as escort leader between 1943 and 1944. What she discovered was a pattern of tragedy that had been attributed to German tactical improvements, but were actually the result of deliberate sabotage. The first case study involved the mission of October 14, 1943, a bombing raid against the ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt, Germany. Morrison had been assigned as escort leader for one section of the bomber formation, responsible for protecting 12 B-17 flying fortresses and their crews. The official mission report stated that Morrison's section had encountered unexpectedly heavy German fighter resistance, resulting in the loss of 8 of the 12 bombers under his protection. Morrison himself was credited with shooting down 2 German fighters during the engagement, earning him a Distinguished Flying Cross for his apparent heroism in the face of overwhelming odds. But Dr. Reynolds' analysis revealed troubling gaps in Morrison's account of the battle. According to the surviving bomber crews from Morrison's section, the German fighters had appeared with remarkable precision, targeting the most vulnerable aircraft in the formation with coordinated attacks that suggested detailed advanced knowledge of the bomber's defensive capabilities and crew positions. Staff Sergeant William Muller, a tail gunner on one of the surviving B-17s, had filed a report immediately after the mission, expressing serious concern about Morrison's behavior during the attack. Muller's account, buried in classified files for 70 years, painted a very different picture of Morrison's actions that day. The escort leader seemed to know exactly when and where the German fighters would attack. Muller had written, "Instead of positioning our escorts to provide maximum defensive coverage, he kept pulling the P-51s away from the formation at critical moments, claiming to be pursuing German fighters that the rest of us could not see." Most disturbing was what happened when the main German attack began. Morrison's aircraft was perfectly positioned to intercept the first wave of enemy fighters, but instead he turned away from the threat, claiming radio problems. The German fighters were able to attack our bombers without interference for over 3 minutes before the other escorts could respond. 78 American airmen died during the Schweinfurt mission. Their bodies were never recovered. Their families were told only that they had died heroically in service to their country. None of them knew that their deaths had been arranged by one of their own protectors. The pattern repeated itself throughout Morrison's combat tour. The mission to Berlin on March 6, 1944, resulted in the loss of 15 bombers from formations under Morrison's protection. The raid on Augsburg on April 13, 1944, cost 23 American aircraft and 230 crew members. In each case, Morrison's official reports described heroic action against overwhelming German resistance. In each case, he was credited with multiple aerial victories and recommended for decorations. And in each case, the actual survivors described behavior that suggested Morrison had advanced knowledge of German attack plans and had positioned himself to avoid genuine combat while ensuring maximum damage to the bombers he was supposed to protect. But the most heartbreaking case involved the mission of May 28, 1944, just 9 days before D-Day. Morrison had been assigned to escort a formation of B-24 liberators attacking German transportation targets in preparation for the Normandy invasion. The mission was considered routine with minimal German fighter activity expected. Instead, the bombers encountered what the official report described as the most concentrated German fighter attack of the war. 18 B-24s were shot down, taking with them 180 American airmen. Among the dead was Second Lieutenant Robert Hayes, the younger brother of a Pearl Harbor survivor who had tried to expose Nazi sabotage in 1941. Robert Hayes died believing he was protected by America's greatest fighter ace, never knowing that his death had been arranged by the man he trusted to bring him home safely. Dr. Reynolds's investigation had established that Morrison was operating as a German asset, but she still needed to understand how such an operation was coordinated and controlled. The answer came from an unexpected source: the personal diary of Oberst Klaus Richter, a Luftwaffe intelligence officer whose papers had been captured by Soviet forces in 1945 and only recently made available to Western researchers. Richter's diary, written in a mixture of German and English, provided a direct account of one of Nazi Germany's most successful intelligence operations. The entries dating from 1943 to 1944 revealed the carefully built network that had enabled Morrison to operate as a double agent while maintaining his cover as an American war hero. The operation, code-named Adler Flug, meaning Eagle Flight, had been designed to place German assets within Allied fighter squadrons where they could provide real-time intelligence about bomber formations, flight routes, and defensive tactics. Morrison had been the most valuable part of this program, an American pilot whose exceptional combat record provided perfect cover for his intelligence activities. According to Richter's diary, Morrison received his instructions through a complex system of coded radio transmissions disguised as routine military communications. The German radio equipment visible in Morrison's cockpit was not just for receiving intelligence. It was for sending real-time tactical information to Luftwaffe interceptors. The 15th of August 1944, Richter wrote, received excellent intelligence from Adler 1 regarding tomorrow's bombing mission to Stuttgart. Target information, approach routes, escort strength, and timing all conf. Ear, armed. Have positioned fighter squadrons accordingly. Estimate 20 to 25 enemy bombers will be destroyed with minimal German losses. Adler 1 was Morrison's code name within the German intelligence network. The diary entries revealed that Morrison's victories against German aircraft had been carefully staged. The German fighters he claimed to have shot down were either old aircraft flown by expendable pilots or were aircraft that had suffered genuine mechanical failures. In some cases, German pilots had been ordered to eject from undamaged aircraft to give Morrison believable victory claims. But Richter's most damaging revelation concerned Morrison's activities on D-Day itself. June 6, 1944, Richter wrote, Adler 1 provided crucial intelligence about Allied air support for the Normandy invasion. While we cannot prevent the landing itself, his information has allowed us to position our fighter reserves to maximize damage to Allied air operations. The Americans trust him completely. They have assigned him to lead fighter sweeps over the invasion beaches. On D-Day, Morrison had been responsible for protecting Allied ground attack aircraft as they supported the troops landing on Omaha and Utah beaches. His sector had experienced the highest rate of aircraft losses during the invasion, with 12 Allied fighters shot down in areas where Morrison was providing top cover. The official reports credited these losses to unexpectedly strong German air resistance. The reality was that Morrison had been giving the Germans exact timing and positioning information for every Allied air operation in his sector. But Richter's diary also revealed that Morrison's handlers had been planning something even more daring. Beginning in late 1944, they intended to use Morrison's growing reputation and influence to affect Allied strategic planning at the highest levels. November 1944, Richter wrote, Adler 1 will soon be promoted to squadron command. His war record and reputation make him ideally positioned to influence Allied air strategy for 1945. The High Command is particularly interested in intelligence about Allied plans for bombing German jet aircraft production facilities. The jet aircraft program represented Germany's last hope for regaining air superiority over Europe. If Morrison could provide intelligence about Allied targeting priorities, the Germans might be able to protect their most important facilities while allowing less important ones to be bombed, keeping their cover story while preserving their technological edge. But Richter's final entry, dated December 15th, 1944, revealed that something had gone wrong with the operation. Lost contact with Adler 1 as of December 12th. His last transmission indicated possible security concerns. Fear the operation may be compromised. Morrison had vanished from his base in England on December 12, 1944, just as Allied intelligence was beginning to suspect that they had a traitor in their ranks. December 12, 1944, dawned cold and foggy over Raaf Leiston, the English air base, where Morrison's 357th Fighter Group was stationed. According to official records, Lieutenant Colonel Morrison had taken off at 6:30 hours for what was described as a routine reconnaissance flight over the North Sea. He never returned. The initial search and rescue operation found no trace of Morrison or his aircraft. The official report concluded that he had likely suffered mechanical failure over the North Sea and crashed in waters too deep for recovery. Morrison was listed as missing in action and later declared killed in action when no evidence of his survival was found. But Dr. Reynolds' investigation revealed that Morrison's disappearance had been far from routine. Classified intelligence reports from December 1st, 944, recently declassified by the CIA, showed that Allied counterintelligence had been investigating suspicious patterns in Luftwaffe fighter tactics throughout the fall of 1944. German interceptors were displaying uncanny knowledge of Allied bomber formations, flight routes, and defensive capabilities that suggested they had access to high-level intelligence sources. The investigation, code-named Broken Wing, had identified several potential security breaches within Allied air operations. Morrison's name appeared on a list of personnel with access to sensitive information who were to be subjected to enhanced security checks. But Morrison had disappeared just 2 days before his scheduled interview with counterintelligence officers. The circumstances of his disappearance became even more suspicious when Dr. Reynolds examined the maintenance records for Morrison's aircraft. The P-51 Mustang he had flown on his final mission had undergone significant changes just 3 days earlier. Changes that were not standard for reconnaissance flights. According to the maintenance logs, Morrison's aircraft had been fitted with additional fuel tanks that would have extended its range to over 1,200 miles. This was far more fuel capacity than needed for a routine reconnaissance mission over the North Sea, but it would have been sufficient to reach neutral territory in Sweden or Switzerland. More significantly, the aircraft had been equipped with specialized navigation equipment, including a German-manufactured radio compass that would have allowed precise navigation to planned coordinates. This equipment had been installed on Morrison's personal authority, bypassing normal approval procedures. But the most telling evidence came from Morrison's personal effects, which had been packed and shipped to his family in Detroit just hours before his final flight. Dr. Reynolds discovered that Morrison had emptied his personal bank accounts and transferred the funds to a Swiss account in the days leading up to his disappearance. He had also mailed a series of letters to family members and friends, letters that were not delivered until after he was reported missing. The letters, examined by handwriting experts in 2022, showed signs of stress and urgency, suggesting they had been written by someone preparing for a permanent disappearance rather than a routine military mission. But perhaps the most damning evidence was found in Morrison's quarters after his disappearance. Hidden behind a loose floorboard, investigators found a Leica camera containing undeveloped film that showed classified Allied intelligence documents, aircraft recognition charts, and detailed maps of bomber formations and escort patterns. The film also contained photographs that Morrison had taken during his supposed combat missions, images that showed German aircraft and installations from angles and distances that would have been impossible during actual combat engagements. These photographs proved that Morrison had been moving freely in German-controlled airspace, documenting intelligence targets for his handlers. Counterintelligence officers concluded that Morrison had been planning his escape for weeks, possibly months. His final mission had been a carefully staged defection to German-controlled territory, timed to occur just as Allied investigators were closing in on his activities. But Morrison's story did not end with his disappearance over the North Sea. Intelligence reports from neutral countries suggested that he had successfully reached German territory and had been welcomed as a valuable defector. Swiss intelligence files made available to researchers in 2019 contained reports of an American pilot matching Morrison's description, who had arrived in Switzerland in December 1944, claiming to be a defector seeking protection. The pilot had been questioned by German intelligence officers before being moved across the border into Germany. Morrison's betrayal of his fellow airmen was complete. But his story was far from over. The end of World War II in May 1945 should have meant the end of James Morrison's story. But newly declassified CIA files revealed that America's most notorious traitor pilot had continued his espionage activities well into the Cold War era. His knowledge in aviation and his understanding of American military capabilities made him too valuable for his German handlers to walk away from. Dr. Service, Reynolds's investigation took an unexpected turn when she received a call from Dr. Sarah Martinez, a historian specializing in Operation Paperclip, the classified American program that brought Nazi scientists and intelligence officers to the United States after the war. Martinez had been analyzing recently released documents when she discovered references to a Colonel J. Morris, who had been working with former Luftwaffe personnel on advanced jet aircraft development. The dates, locations, and technical knowledge described in the documents matched Morrison's background perfectly. The Americans were so desperate to gain access to German jet technology, Martinez explained during their meeting at the CIA's historical archives, that they were willing to work with almost anyone who could provide useful information. If Morrison had genuine knowledge of both Allied and German aviation capabilities, he would have been incredibly valuable to both sides. The documents revealed that Colonel Morris had been involved in the development of what would become the F-86 Sabre fighter jet, America's primary air superiority fighter during the Korean War. His contributions were officially credited to captured German research, but the technical innovations Shaw owed the influence of someone with deep knowledge of both German and American fighter design thinking. But Morrison's activities after the war extended far beyond aircraft development. FBI surveillance files from the 1950s, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, showed that several former Nazi intelligence officers who had been brought to America under Operation Paperclip maintained contact with a mysterious figure identified only as the American pilot. This figure served as a go-between for former German intelligence operatives and certain parts of the American defense establishment, helping with the exchange of technical information while keeping everyone's cover intact. The arrangement worked well for all involved. The Germans gained protection and resources to continue their research. The Americans gained access to advanced military technology, and Morrison gained a new identity and purpose within the growing Cold War intelligence world. But Morrison's most significant activity after the war involved the Korean War, where his knowledge of American fighter tactics and capabilities was used against his former countrymen with deadly results. Classified Chinese military documents, captured during the Korean conflict, and finally declassified in 2018, referenced an American aviation advisor who had provided detailed intelligence about U.S. air, force operational procedures, aircraft capabilities, and pilot training methods. This intelligence had been used to develop tactics that resulted in the loss of dozens of American aircraft and pilots during the early phases of the war. The advisor was described as a former fighter pilot with extensive combat experience who had chosen to serve the cause of international socialism rather than American interests. While never identified by name in the Chinese documents, the technical details and strategic insights attribute D to this advisor matched Morrison's background and knowledge perfectly. Dr. Reynolds's analysis of Korean War air combat numbers revealed patterns disturbingly similar to those she had identified in Morrison's World War II operations. American fighter formations operating in sectors where the mysterious advisor's intelligence was being applied suffered casualty rates significantly higher than those in other areas. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came from Soviet archives, made available after the end of the Cold War. Documents from the KGB's Foreign Intelligence Office showed that they had been in contact with an American aviation expert code named Eagle, who had been providing intelligence about US military capabilities since the late 1940s. Eagle had been instrumental in helping Soviet aviation designers develop ways to counter American aircraft, contributing to the development of MiG fighters that would prove devastatingly effective against American aircraft throughout the Cold War. The KGB files described Eagle as their most valuable long-term asset in American aviation circles, someone who had shown unwavering commitment to their cause through decades of faithful service. But Morrison's decades-long career as a traitor was about to face its greatest challenge when a new generation of investigators began asking questions about America's aviation heroes. The investigation that would finally expose James Morrison's true legacy began not in government archives or intelligence agencies, but in a suburban garage in Detroit, Michigan, where Morrison's great-grandson was cleaning out family storage after his grandmother's death in 2021. 26-year-old Kevin Morrison had grown up hearing family stories about his heroic great-grandfather, the fighter ace who had died serving his country during World War II. The family had kept James Morrison's medals, photograph, his, and personal effects as treasured heirlooms, never questioning the official story of his death in action. But when Kevin discovered a locked metal box hidden beneath decades of family documents, he found items that did not match the heroic story he had always believed. The box contained German military documents, photographs of Morrison with Luftwaffe officers, and most disturbing of all, a detailed confession letter that Morrison had apparently written but never sent, describing his activities as a German agent and expressing regret for the American lives his betrayal had cost. Kevin Morrison faced the same impossible choice that others had confronted before him: protect his family's honor by hiding the truth, or expose a secret that had remained buried for nearly 8 decades. He chose truth. Kevin's call to the National Air and Space Museum in September 2022 had led to Dr. Reynolds' investigation, but it also triggered a much larger inquiry involving multiple government agencies. The FBI's Cold War Counterintelligence Division, the CIA's Historical Review Group, and the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency all became involved as the full extent of Morrison's betrayal became clear. The investigation revealed that Morrison's treachery had extended far beyond his World War II activities. Using his post-war identity as Colonel J. Morris, he had been involved in numerous classified projects throughout the 1950s and 1960s, each giving him opportunities to gather intelligence that could be passed to hostile foreign governments. But Morrison's most significant post-war operation had involved the development of the U-2 spy plane program. Working as a technical consultant for Lockheed Aircraft, he had gained access to classified information about the aircraft's capabilities, operational procedures, and planned missions over Soviet territory. This intelligence had been passed to the Soviet Union through his KGB handlers, enabling them to develop the surface-to-air missiles that would eventually shoot down Gary Powers's U-2 over Soviet airspace in 1960. The international crisis that resulted from Powers's capture had nearly led to war between the United States and the Soviet Union. CIA counterintelligence analysts reviewing Morrison's activities concluded that he had been responsible for compromising dozens of classified operations over a period of more than 20 years. The human cost of his betrayal was staggering. Hundreds of American military personnel killed in action due to compromised intelligence, numerous secret operations exposed and destroyed, and American technological advantages steadily undermined. But perhaps Morrison's most damaging legacy was the doubt his betrayal cast on other American war heroes. If one of the most celebrated fighter aces of World War II could be a traitor, how many other heroes might have been working for the enemy? The investigation triggered a full review of military records from the World War II era, examining the combat records and post-war activities of other highly decorated personnel. The investigation expanded to include Korean War and Vietnam War veterans, examining whether similar networks of compromised personnel had operated during those conflicts. While no evidence of similar large-scale betrayal was found, the review process used enormous resources and created lasting suspicion within military intelligence circles. Dr. Reynolds's publication of her findings in 2023 sent shockwaves through the military history community. The revelation that James Morrison had been a German agent forced historians to look again at numerous World War II operations, questioning casualty figures and strategic decisions that had previously been explained by German tactical superiority. But the most profound impact was on the families of the airmen who had died under Morrison's protection. Kevin Morrison received hundreds of letters from descendants of bomber crews who had been killed during missions where his great-grandfather had served as escort leader. The painful process of facing historical truth had only just begun, and the final chapter of Morrison's story would prove even more shocking than his wartime betrayal. Dr. Reynolds thought she had uncovered the full extent of James Morrison's betrayal when she received an encrypted email from an anonymous source in January 2023. The message contained a single line: "Morrison did not die in 1944. Check the nursing home records in Phoenix, Arizona, 1987 to 1995. The tip seemed impossible. Morrison would have been nearly 80 years old by 1987, and there was no evidence he had survived the war, let alone lived in the United States under a false identity for decades after his supposed death. But Dr. Reynolds had learned not to dismiss any lead in an investigation that had already destroyed so many accepted truths. Working with a private investigator specializing in genealogical research, she began examining nursing home records throughout the Phoenix area. The search seemed hopeless until they discovered the records of Sunset Manor Care Facility, where a patient named James Morris had resided from 1987 until his death in 1995. The physical description, birth year, and personal details matched Morrison perfectly, but it was the patient's medical records that provided solid proof of identity. James Morris had distinctive scars on his left arm and shoulder that were identical to injuries Morrison had reported after a training accident in 1942. More significantly, his fingerprints, taken during routine medical procedures, matched prints found on Morrison's personal effects discovered by his great-grandson. America's most notorious traitor pilot had been living quietly in Arizona for nearly 50 years after his supposed death, maintaining his false identity while collecting Social Security benefits and veterans' disability payments under the made-up name of James Morris. But Morrison's presence in an Arizona nursing home raised even more troubling questions about who had helped him return to the United States and why. The investigation into his life after the war revealed a network of former intelligence operatives who had helped Nazi war criminals and American traitors establish new identities and blend into American society. The nursing home records showed that Morrison's care had been paid for by a trust fund managed by a law firm in Phoenix that specialized in representing clients with complex international backgrounds. The firm's records, obtained by federal investigators, revealed that Morrison's trust had been set up in 1962 with funding that could be traced to Swiss bank accounts previously used by Nazi intelligence operations. More significantly, the records showed that Morrison had not been living in isolation. He had received regular visits from individuals whose backgrounds pointed to ongoing connections to intelligence activities. These visitors included former CIA operatives who had worked on Operation Paperclip, retired military officers with ties to classified aerospace programs, and several individuals who had been the subjects of FBI counterintelligence investigations during the 1970s and 1980s. The pattern suggested that Morrison had remained an active intelligence asset throughout his supposed retirement, possibly offering consultation services to whoever was willing to pay for his rare combination of aviation expertise and intelligence experience. But the most shocking discovery came from Morrison's personal effects, which had been kept by the nursing home after his death. 1995. Among his possessions was a detailed diary covering the period from 1962 to 1994, written in a combination of English, German, and what appeared to be a complex cipher code. The portions of the diary that could be decoded revealed that Morrison had continued his intelligence activities well into the 1990s, serving as a consultant on projects involving aerospace technology, satellite surveillance, and military communications systems. His clients had included defense contractors, foreign governments, and private intelligence firms whose work moved in the gray areas between legitimate business and espionage. The diary entries showed that Morrison had remained without regret about his wartime betrayal, seeing his actions as part of a larger ideological commitment that went beyond national loyalties. The concept of patriotism is a tool used by governments to control their populations. He had written in 1985, "I have always served the highest bidder because that is the most honest form of loyalty in a world built on deception." But Morrison's final entries, written in the months before his death, revealed a growing fear about being discovered. He had become convinced that intelligence agencies were getting close to his true identity and had begun making preparations to destroy evidence of his activities. "They are asking too many questions about the old operations," he wrote in November 1994. "The young investigators do not understand the complexities of the post-war period. They see everything in black and white, good and evil. If they discover the truth about the arrangements that were made, it will destroy more than just my reputation." Morrison's final entry, dated March 15, 1995, just 2 weeks before his death, was the most revealing. "I have arranged for certain documents to be distributed if anything happens to me. The people who protected me for 50 years need to understand that their secrets are not safe if I am threatened. We all have too much to lose for anyone to betray the arrangement." Dr. Reynolds realized that Morrison's death in 1995 might not have been from natural causes, as the death certificate claimed. If he had been threatening to expose the network that had shielded him for decades, his former handlers might have decided that he had become too dangerous to keep alive. The investigation into Morrison's death revealed suspicious details that had been overlooked at the time. He had died suddenly of what was listed as a heart attack, but medical records showed that he had been in good health just days before his death. More significantly, his room had been thoroughly cleaned and all personal possessions removed within hours of his death, before family members or authorities could examine them. But Morrison's final deception was about to be revealed through evidence he had never intended to leave behind. The truth about James Morrison's final years came to light through the most unexpected source, a digital photograph enhancement of the original 1944 image that had started Dr. Disker, Reynolds' investigation, using artificial intelligence technology developed in 2023. Researchers were able to pull out details from the photograph that had been invisible even to the most advanced enhancement techniques available just months earlier. The new analysis revealed that Morrison's flight jacket contained a hidden pocket with documents that were far more detailed than the German coordinates Dr. Reynolds had first discovered. The enhanced images showed what appeared to be a complete intelligence file, including photographs of American military personnel, technical details of Allied aircraft, and most disturbing of all, a list of names that included other American pilots suspected of working with German intelligence. The list contained 17 names, including several pilots who had been honored as war heroes and had gone on to respected careers in the military and aerospace industry. Checking these names against post-war intelligence files revealed a pattern of suspicious activities suggesting that Morrison had been part of a much larger network of American military personnel who had been turned by German intelligence. But the most shocking revelation came from the final name on the list, Kevin Morrison's grandfather, James Morrison, Jr., who had served as a Navy pilot in the Pacific Theater. The document suggested that Morrison's betrayal had been a family affair, with his son recruited to provide intelligence about American naval operations against Japan. Kevin Morrison faced the devastating realization that his family's betrayal of America had stretched across multiple generations and theaters of war. His great-grandfather had betrayed Allied airmen to the Germans, while his grandfather had apparently provided intelligence to the Japanese that had cost American naval personnel their lives. The investigation into James Morrison Jr.'s activities revealed that he had been responsible for the loss of at least 2 American aircraft carriers in the Pacific, providing the Japanese with detailed intelligence about American fleet movements and defensive capabilities. His actions had contributed to some of the most devastating American naval losses of the war, including the sinking of the USS Hornet and the heavy casualties suffered during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was that both Morrisons had survived the war and had kept up their work with foreign intelligence services throughout the Cold War. Father and son had operated as a family intelligence operation, selling American military secrets to whoever was willing to pay the highest price. The evidence suggested that their activities had put American military operations at risk from World War II through the Gulf War, spanning nearly 50 years of ongoing betrayal that had cost thousands of American lives and damaged American strategic interests around the world. Dr. No Conspiration, Strategic Interests Around the World. Dr. Reynolds' investigation came to a head in a classified briefing to senior Pentagon officials in December 2023, where she presented evidence that American military history contained far more instances of betrayal and hidden cooperation than had ever been suspected. The Morrison case had opened a window into a hidden world where loyalty was for sale and patriotism was corrupted by ideology and greed. The Pentagon's response was swift and far-reaching. A joint task force was set up to review the combat records and post-war activities of all highly decorated World War II veterans, looking for patterns similar to those found in the Morrison case. The investigation expanded to include Korean War and Vietnam War veterans, examining whether similar networks of turned personnel had operated during those conflicts. But the human cost of the Morrison investigation extended far beyond military history. Kevin Morrison's decision to expose his family's betrayal had triggered a national conversation about the nature of heroism and the reliability of historical accounts. Families of other World War II veterans demanded investigations into their ancestors' service records, worried that their own family heroes might have hidden similar dark secrets. The enhanced photograph that had started the investigation became a symbol of how new technology could bring out historical truths that had been hidden for decades. Museums around the world began looking again, at their collections of wartime photographs, using advanced digital analysis to search for evidence of other deceptions and betrayals. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the Morrison case was the recognition that historical truth is never fixed or final. Each new generation of investigators, equipped with new tools and fresh eyes, has the ability to uncover secrets that earlier generations had missed or deliberately buried. Dr. Reynolds's final report ended with a sobering conclusion. The Morrison case shows that our understanding of history is only as reliable as our ability to question accepted stories and look at evidence with new perspectives. The heroes we celebrate today may be revealed as villains tomorrow, and the villains we condemn may prove to have been more complicated than we understood. James Morrison's 1944 photograph had seemed ordinary for nearly 80 years. Just another image of an American fighter pilot posing beside his aircraft. But advanced digital enhancement had revealed the disturbing details that exposed one of the most wide-reaching betrayals in American military history. The young pilot who had smiled confidently at the camera in 1944 had been hiding more than German radio equipment and intelligence documents. He had been hiding a betrayal that would span generations and cost thousands of American lives, all while keeping up the image of heroism that had protected him for nearly 5 decades. The ordinary photograph had revealed an extraordinary deception, proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who smile while wearing the uniform of friendship. This incredible story of betrayal, deception, and the power of new technology to reveal historical truth shows us that we must always question the stories we accept about our heroes and our past. If this investigation into one man's lifetime of treachery moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think there are other historical photographs hiding similar dark secrets? What other mysteries from our past should we investigate with modern technology? Remember, sometimes the most ordinary images contain the most extraordinary revelations about the people we thought we knew.